Prophecy is a huge topic in the Guide for the Perplexed. And I've said this several times, that if you are not a religious person, when the prophecy is mentioned, you might be like, yeah, it's not something that really needs to be needs to be talked about. Really, it's just for the religious people who have to have faith in religion, then they believe in prophecy. But when you read the book, The Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides has a very interesting approach to this topic, and is a very practical approach, is very technical, is very scientific, I might say. And he puts it in such a way that even if you are not a religious person, you see what he means by prophecy, and you see it, that it has, if we take his how he argues prophecy to be, then it is something that's happening even outside of religious realm. Now, this is how he defines, and I'm going to come to that. This is how he defines prophecy. He says prophecy in truth and reality. Prophecy is, in truth and reality, an emanation sent forth by the divine being through the medium of active intellect, in the first instance to man's rational faculty, and then to his imaginative faculty. It is the highest degree and the greatest perfection man can attain. It consists in the most perfect development of the imaginative faculty. Now, that's how he defines prophecy. So, for the most important things to underline here are active intellect, rational faculty, imaginative faculty. Like those are the points that he talks a lot about in the book. So as far as prophecy goes, now he says prophecy to him is one step above philosophy. That's how he puts it. To him, prophecy is one step above philosophy. So while philosophy is okay, here is the thing, like that to him, that's an hierarchy of intellectual processing and understanding of the universe and the reality. So then you move up to, of course, philosophy, and then he says now prophecy goes a little bit, it's one step above philosophy. So he says to be a prophet, he says one has to be of physical well-being, moral health, and some training. Now, here is something that he mentions a lot in the book. He kind of scoffs at the idea that anybody can become a prophet, especially anybody without any form of training. He says a prophet has to be trained. And he also says a prophet has to be trained in logical matter, or philosophy, basically, and also scientific methods. They have to have, they need to be very highly trained in their understanding of things around them. And he says that a prophet is likely to provide the best knowledge or prophecy regarding things that they are very much conversant with. That if it's going to be and I'm going to mention this because the way he explained prophecy to him, he opens it up to include things like scientific discovery. For him, somebody who discovers something scientific is a prophet. And I was reading that part, and I was thinking, I did read this story of the guy who discovered penicillin. What is his name? I'm forgetting his name. Penicillin discover guy. Is it penicillin? I might be wrong. Penicillin. Let me see. Alexander Fleming. Yes, Alexander Fleming. So I did read a story about how Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, and it was so interesting. It's not something he was really working towards. It's something that happened like an accident. He saw something on his table. He could have easily ignored it, but he decided to investigate further, and that's how he discovered penicillin. And penicillin changed health surveys around the world. Because before penicillin, if you got any bacterial infection, you had to die. There was nothing that could be done to you. And by discovering penicillin, everything changed. And as I was reading that part of Maimonides' book, it occurred to me, then if we use his method or his way of describing who a prophet is, then Alexander Fleming becomes a prophet. He had this knowledge, most scientific discovery. Anybody who has discovered anything or invented anything through knowledge that they somehow came into by discovering, then you can easily describe them as as prophets. What else? So then he talks about the prophecy in the Bible, and there's something he says about it that I found it something I had never thought about. I was a church person, used to go to church, and prophecy is one of those things that you have to come across in the church. Either people tell you they can prophesy, or you read about prophecy in the Bible. And he was saying, he generally is saying the prophets did not, even if you read in the Bible that God spoke to them or the angel spoke to them, it wasn't like literal that they saw an angel or they saw God. It's maybe they just sat somewhere and an idea came into their mind and they shared it with the people, and that was prophecy. And sometimes that happened to be a very useful information that they just that came into their mind, and then they would use language like the angel spoke to me or God spoke to me. But he says you shouldn't take it literal to mean when you hear you read somewhere that the prophet says an angel spoke to them, and then you assume they really saw a physical angel before them. And so he says these things were visions and dreams, and or sometimes they were just alert and they are just sitting somewhere, and then an idea just pops up, a light bulb moment, we can say, and that information that lights up in their mind turns out to be a very important information, and then you can just, that becomes prophecy, basically. That was saying, he says, because if we say that God spoke, then we are assuming that God speaks in the language of man, and to him that's not really it. God, we are just using those words God speak because it's easier for us to relate to that, like God spoke, because if we start talking about other things, then we might get confused, and that's why the Bible was written the way it was written. So he says this prophecy, as I've said, come through in terms of visions, dreams, thoughts in the mind, light bulb moments, yeah, and all those become prophetic messages. Yeah.